know how I read all of these books. I have a job. I'm gonna read less. You're probably gonna be able to hear Patty's paws/toenails. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have picked a new filming location, the remnants of a messy kitchen over there, and also a 3D printer, which does not belong to me. Today, I'm here to chat about the books that I read in August. A pretty good reading month, because I read 17 books in August, which is absolutely more books than I think I've probably ever read in a month. It's more books than I've read in previous years. The intention of sharing that is not to say, ooh, how many books can you read in a month? If you read one book, that's great. If you read 10 books, that's great. I don't know. I've got quite a few shorter books and a couple graphic novels in there as well. This was also like a pretty fiction heavy month. I do like nonfiction and I usually read more nonfiction, but I think summer during a pandemic, there are a handful of memoirs throughout this, but definitely a fiction heavier month. Let's just dive right in. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Best We Could Do by Thi Bui. This is an illustrated memoir. It's a memoir in graphic novel form. Really starting to like graphic novels. I already liked memoirs, so I was like, this is cool. I had not heard about this. Really, really beautiful illustrations. It's almost more of her telling her family's story through a graphic novel. So it's a really generational look at her life, her siblings' lives, her parents, her grandparents, but specifically their lives as it relates to them coming to America as refugees from Vietnam. There's a lot in here historically that I was really unfamiliar with, but we learned nothing about the Vietnam War in school, so a lot of that history was all new to me. But it's also just a really beautiful story, and like The Best We Could Do, I think kind of referring to how her family's history shaped how she was raised and how she is as an adult. Yeah, I thought this was really interesting, really special, really different from anything I'd ever read, but actually not the only graphic novel memoir I read this month, but we will get to that. I don't like to rate memoirs, but I would recommend this. The next book that I read was Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. When I posted that I was reading this on Instagram, so many people had so many good things to say about it, had so many good things to say about the movie, which I also didn't know there was a movie, and I had no idea what this book was about going into it. I knew that the cover was beautiful, good reviews on Goodreads, sold. My standards are not low. Simple. I have very simple standards. Everything Everything is kind of a forbidden love story. So it follows our main character, Maddie. She's a high school student with an autoimmune disease that makes it so that she cannot leave her house. The only people that she interacts with are her mother and her sort of caregiver nurse. And for most of her life, she's pretty content with this until she looks out the window one day and sees this very cute teenage boy whose family is moving in next door named Ollie, and her and Ollie manage to start speaking over IM. And it's just sort of this Maddie who all of a sudden really desperately wants kind of like a normal teenage life. It sounds cheesy in that synopsis, but I found it a really cute love story. I was really rooting for their love. I was totally bought into it. For a book that mainly takes place inside the main character's house, there's quite a bit that goes on. We saw some of her diaries. We saw some of Maddie does these like one sentence book reviews that are sort of scattered throughout the book. We see the IMs between her and Ollie, and I love when a book does that. I loved the ending. Maybe I don't know if that's controversial. I don't know if people like the ending, but I really liked the ending. I thought it was really gasp worthy, I suppose you might say. I definitely want to read The Sun Is Also a Star, which is another book by Nicola Yoon. This is a very chaotic stack. Next up, we have My Sister the Serial Killer by oyinkan Braithwaite. Someone was giving away this book on an app that I use, and I sent my partner out in the rain to go get it, and I think it was worth Rob going in the rain to get me this book, if I do say so myself. This is like about 200 pages. A fictional story, probably a fictional story in Nigeria, told through the eyes of Ayoola, whose sister Korede, as the title would imply, is a serial killer. Who would have thunk it? The book sort of centers around Ayoola cleaning up her sister's messes, both literally and figuratively. I would characterize this as sort of a dark satire. I mean, there's definitely like elements of bonds between sisters, but it was really just kind of one of those books where the idea is so wild and dark. I found it enjoyable for that reason alone. There's definitely like some heavier bits in this as well. History of family violence and trauma. You obviously don't just, well, maybe you do. I don't think you just become a serial killer one day. One of the quotes in the back says, delightfully naughty, which as cheesy as that sounds, I think that that's like a good characterization. It shouldn't be enjoyable, but it is. Another thing that I think is kind of fun about this book is that it spins the trope of women being murdered by their partners on its head, because you're not just seeing a sister who is a serial killer, she's killing her boyfriend. It's empowering for women to be serial killers, but I think you just read so many books about violence against women and gender-based violence. For a fictional story, this book is really like, we're not gonna do that this time. This is upside down. What this book reminded me of, even though the plots are not similar at all, was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. They couldn't even look more different from their covers, but this was another book that is a quick, kind of chaotic, absurd fiction, and I really, really enjoyed this book as well. They kind of just gave me similar vibes that I would recommend if you have read one of these and liked it. I would suggest reading the other and seeing if you like it as well. So that's that. Next up we have Love from A to Z by S.K. Ali. This is probably a YA romance. This follows two characters, Zainab and Adam, two Muslim teenagers. Adam is from Canada, which was kind of fun, but his family moved to Qatar when he was young. And then Zainab is from the States, and she's visiting her aunt in Qatar for spring break. These two cross paths on the airplane, and then sort of once they get there, their lives sort of just intertwine. This book is told through the diaries of the two main characters. Adam is struggling with a recent diagnosis with multiple sclerosis. He's also dealing with the recent death of his mother. Both of them are exploring this relationship when their faith and their religion is really important to them. Islamophobia and racism show up a lot in this book, particularly when it comes to Zainab, who is facing it from a teacher and struggling with that, and like some other heavier themes as well. I thought this was really sweet. I don't know if I've read any YA books where both of the main characters were Muslim, so I thought that was cool. I thought it was a good story. I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I think that if you were a young Muslim person, this book would probably mean more to you than it did to me. Not that I didn't think it was good, but I think because all of these things aren't part of my lived experience, while I enjoyed the book, I can imagine that it would be really meaningful to some people. It also made me really want to go to Qatar. I definitely was looking at plane tickets upon finishing this, when there is no longer a pandemic. Next up, because one graphic novel memoir in a month is never enough, we have Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. The only thing I knew about this book going into it was that there is a play based off of this graphic novel that some friends whose opinions I trust dearly had seen and read this and said good things about it, and that Alison Bechdel is the person who coined the Bechdel test, which is like a threshold for women's meaningful representation in film. It is dark. Fun Home is actually an abbreviation for funeral home, where her and her siblings spend a lot of their time as children. Perhaps more than a to Z memoir, it's really more of an exploration of her and her father's relationship, their relationship with each other, as well as with their respective sexualities. Much of this book centers around the author's experience identifying with coming out as a lesbian, and her discovery only a few weeks prior to her father's death that he was either gay or bisexual. I know some people who have read this for like gender studies courses in university. I did not get to read this for my gender studies program, and I get that. For a graphic novel, the themes of sort of gender expression, sexuality, there's a lot going on in here. Some things also went over my head in this book. So there's a lot of sort of undertones of like famous plays and classic literature, stuff that I don't know anything about. Ulysses. I didn't say any of those words right. I don't think that should stop you from reading it. Not what you always necessarily are looking for when you're looking for a graphic novel, but I did like it. Especially if you're interested in gender studies, queer theory, thems types of things, I would recommend this because it's a really good pairing of that with reading with a graphic novel. So yeah, that's that on that. The next book, which I also don't have currently, is The Agony of Bun O'Keefe by Heather Smith, which is another one I had never heard of. Read the synopsis and was like, cool, that sounds cute, I'll give it a try. The setting of this book is probably what appealed most to me. It's set in 1980s Newfoundland and Labrador, which is the easternmost province in Canada. Our main character is a young teenager named Bun, whose mom is a hoarder. She kicks her out of her house and she makes her way to the provincial capital called St. John's, where she meets a busker on the street. Rather than something horrible happening, he takes her in to his house and introduces her to his roommates, which are sort of this smorgasbord of misfits. So you have a drag queen, you have a chef, a woman who works at a candy store. One of the kind of main themes of this book that I really loved was the idea of chosen family. I thought it was really cute. My mom read it after me and I think said it was now one of her favorite books. It was also a pretty short book, but cute, Canadian. I hope that I've gained your respect for the first bit of this video, because now I'm going to talk together about the next 3 books that I read, which I don't have because bookshelf space is precious. The next 3 books that I read in August were Twilight, New Moon, and Eclipse by Stephenie Meyer. Listen, is the writing in the Twilight series horrible? Yes. Are they problematic in so many different ways? Absolutely. Are they very long for what ultimately feels like very little character or plot development? For sure. Did I devour them anyways? Yes. I wanted to reread the Twilight series because Midnight Sun is now out, and I was like, oh, I haven't read these in so long. I don't want to read Midnight Sun. I'm talking with my hands so much right now. Until I've reread all of the other Twilight books. Here are my thoughts. I think that Twilight holds up the best. That did withstand the test of time for me. I ended Twilight feeling optimistic. I was like, you know what? This series might not be that bad. And then I got to New Moon. I feel like it's just a universal truth that New Moon sucks. It is just Jacob being annoying and whiny, Edward not being there. I am unequivocally an Edward fan. I actually did a poll, very scientific, on my Instagram story about whether people were Team Edward and Team Jacob. It was kind of a joke because I didn't think anybody was actually going to say Team Jacob, but like 50% of people did. Someone actually commented on that saying the real answer was to be Team Alice and Team Carlisle, which I actually think are the correct answers. All of that aside, so then I thought that because Edward was like back in the picture that Eclipse was gonna be better, and I honestly think that I liked Eclipse maybe the least. First of all, it was long, 600 pages, and I couldn't really tell you what happened, like Victoria, imprinting, newborns, fight. I literally finished it like 2 days ago, and I can't even tell you what went down. Oh, marriage. I feel like I read for probably an hour about Stephenie Meyer's super inaccurate and problematic account of Native American stories and cultures that was just like so bad. This is a quite common critique of Twilight that definitely went over my head at age 12, but it's bad. I will put a link in this video of the tribe that is so horribly misrepresented by Meyer, who did not receive any financial gain from the Twilight series. There's a link where you can donate to them because they've got a couple projects going on that they're looking for funding for right now. I will be donating and did not give Stephenie Meyer money for these books, by the way. I got copies from a friend. But yeah, those are some very haphazard thoughts on Twilight. I literally think of Twilight as being one of those books that like shaped my early teenage years. It was such a phenomenon. I'm gonna keep going with it. I'm not a quitter. I'm not looking forward to the weird baby that I know is coming in Breaking Dawn. I'm gonna rearrange my books to avoid talking about this. The next book that I read was They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. It's kind of like a dystopian YA. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but it's set in this world that is basically the same as the world that we live in now, except there is this phenomenon called deathcast, which is basically a phone call that people get within 24 hours before they die. Sorry to lose ya, make the most out of your last day. And like, I knew this going in, but I was so like perturbed and upset by that concept. It's like The Ring. It follows two characters who are, I think, 17 and 18, Mateo and Rufus. They both get a call from Deathcast one night, and they both happen to also download this app called Last Friend that pairs people who know that they're going to die with another person to be able to spend their final hours with a, quote, last friend. Mateo and Rufus find each other on the Last Friend app. The first thing that I will say that was a plus, both Rufus and Mateo are LGBTQ. Rufus specifically identifies as bisexual. Mateo doesn't actually put a label on his sexuality, but there are elements of sort of a love story between these two characters. And I liked that there was sort of this queer element of the book without it being the main focus. They were fully developed characters other than that fact. This book does a really good job at winding together different narratives in a really subtle way. The main sort of sources you're getting are from Mateo and Rufus's point of view, but you'll get one-off chapters that are told through one of their friends or like a random person who they walk by on the street. And the way that all of these stories fit together, I thought was really intelligent. You would read in one chapter about someone walking by with a blue duffel bag, and you realize later on who the person with the blue duffel bag was. This book did make me cry. I was quite invested in the two characters. There were tears shed. If you're looking for kind of a darker fiction, and a big theme of this book is obviously live each day like it's your last. What would you do if today is your last day? Live each day as if you're gonna get a phone call the night before saying that you're gonna die. I'm gonna say something that I wouldn't say it's a spoiler. I think most people would be okay with this, but if you're very sensitive to spoilers, I will just say to like skip a little bit. The thing that upset me the most about this book, despite picking up a book called They Both Die at the End, the title is a spoiler. I went through the entire book thinking that they were not going to die. There's some mistake that's been made by Deathcast, and no, they die. It is horribly sad. Rob came in and I was crying and he's like, what happened? And I'm like, they died. And he was like, I don't feel bad for you. Death does happen. It happens at the end. I'm gonna go on. Holy shit, we still have a lot more books. Next, In the Dream House, a memoir by Carmen Maria Machado. This book is beautiful. It's a memoir about the author's experience as someone who survived domestic abuse, specifically in a queer relationship. Get this throughout the book that this is not something that is talked about, that it's a little bit of a taboo thing to talk about, which is one theme throughout this that I found so interesting, which is really the author grappling with wanting to share her story while also recognizing that a lot of homophobia, biphobia, queerphobia, transphobia still exists. What might the implications be of telling a story about a relationship that is already often not accepted? What does it mean to tell stories about queer relationships that aren't happy, sunny, painting them in an unequivocally positive way with the view to trying to gain acceptance? So that was a tension that came up over and over. She is writing about her experience in a relationship with another woman. Each chapter is told through a metaphor. So like Dream House as lesbian cult classic, Dream House as famous last words, Dream House as surprise ending. There's one part in this book where there's Dream House as choose your own adventure. That bit gave me chills. This was a really good book. It is haunting. The author is putting her pain and her history on display for her readers to see in a really vulnerable way. I think that this book is something that should be a must read for lots of people, for people who have experience in abusive relationships, that while it might be triggering, is really affirming. It's a good one. 6 books left. I've been talking for so long. Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. I read quite a few darker books this month. I didn't really realize what I was getting myself into, not in a bad way. This was an excellent book. Monday's Not Coming tells the story of our main character, Claudia, whose best friend, named Monday, goes missing. And nobody seems to notice or care. She's alarmed by the fact that her friend is not at school. She's trying to find her. She's trying to raise alarms with her parents, with her friends' parents, with her teachers, with her friends. And nobody seems to be taking seriously the fact that her friend, who is a young black girl, is missing. Basically trying to figure out what exactly has happened to her friend. It's a bit of a slower burn. It also oscillates between 2 different timelines, which I found confusing. I will say that. They make sense at the end, but throughout the book, I was like, I think that's kind of intentional. The social commentary throughout this is really excellent, exploring the fact that the people who nobody seems to care is missing are also stratified along the lines of gender, race, class. Thriller with social commentary, definitely some triggers in this that I would suggest looking at before you get into it. Not quite as YA. Maybe I don't even know what YA is. I thought it was going to be much lighter than it was, and it was pretty heavy. It was very good, but emotionally prepare yourself, I would say. Next up, we have Some Places More Than Others by Renée Watson. This I picked up because, as I do, the cover was cute and it had good ratings on Goodreads. This book was younger than I thought it was. It's definitely more of a middle grade / children's. It was still good. It was still sweet. It centers around Amara, who so desperately wants to go visit her grandfather in Harlem and understand sort of where her dad and her family came from. Finally gets to go and sort of gets to unpick her family's history through this trip to New York City. Kind of like a nice story of like family culture and history. So I also have Piecing Me Together by the same author, which I will inevitably read. I think that this might be a little bit older than this one, so maybe that'll be good. But yeah, if you have younger siblings, people in your life, I think that this was a really cute book. Next up, we have another book I don't have here. When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir by Patrice Kahn Colors. You always know it's a good book when I don't actually have my physical copy, because it means that I've lent it to someone, and I don't like lending people bad books. A memoir written by one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. When They Call You a Terrorist takes us from the very young age of Patrice Kahn Colors right up until sort of her experience establishing the movement, her experiences growing up as a lower income, queer, black woman, fundamentally sort of shaped and kind of informed her experience creating Black Lives Matter. Quite heavy memoir that touches on sort of class and poverty and how that intersects with race, police violence, definitely an indictment of our prison system. I thought it was excellent. It definitely made me realize how little I knew about actually like the origins of Black Lives Matter. Getting to see towards the end of the book the seeds of like how it really came about and those initial sort of organizing, I thought was really interesting. So would definitely recommend, thought it was great. I love a good memoir. Next, we have Upright Woman Wanted by Sarah Gailey. I did like this book. I think that it is very unique and tells a very different story. So it's kind of like this queer Western, like a Wild West. And I was like, that sounds cool. There are horses and cactuses. One of like the main supporting characters is non-binary and uses they them pronouns throughout the book, which is very cool as well. We're living in like this dystopian universe where it's illegal to be anything other than a cisgender straight person. Our main character at the beginning of the book sees her girlfriend executed. So our main character escapes and then joins this band of what are called librarians, who are basically distributing like state-approved literature to people across the country. So that was maybe part of where this book fell short, and it might just be because it is such a short book that I kind of struggle to describe the plot, because there were a lot of things that were just kind of thrown at you that I only later sort of started to piece together. This universe that was created was quite complex, and I didn't feel like I fully understood it, which made me sad because I wanted to understand it, and like I get the gist of it. There was a level of complexity in this world that I don't know was really communicated in the quite brief 150 pages that I got. It didn't quite do it for me. I think I wanted like a Wild West book, and I got elements of that. I didn't like it quite as much as I thought I was going to. I don't think it's going to stick with me. Ignore my Target sticker. The Whisper Man by Alex North. This is a thriller, a horror. This book is about a murderer, serial killer, someone who kills people, tells the story of this small town that was ravaged by this terrifying serial killer called the Whisper Man several years before, and now it appears that we have a copycat murderer. The concept of the Whisper Man is horrifying. This man would go and like whisper in children's windows to like gain their trust before kidnapping them. I don't know, whispering's creepy. Tom, who is a widow who moves to this town with his son Jake, and they're kind of trying to rebuild their lives after his wife / Jake's mom's death. And then Jake starts hearing someone whispering to him, and oh my god, it could be the Whisper Man. The book kind of switches between the perspectives of Tom, who's the dad, Jake, who's the son, two kind of police officers who are working the case. If you like the kind of trope of creepy children, think The Shining. I went back and forth between the hard copy and the audiobook for this. The audiobook was really good, so if you're looking for a thriller to listen to, I would definitely suggest checking out the audiobook for this. My only downside is that I would have been okay if it was more scary. It was creepy. I didn't lose sleep over it, and I wouldn't have hated it if I didn't. Book number 17 is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. What can I say? This book is hella cute. Good rom-com in a book form. The Hating Game follows our two main characters, Lucy and Joshua, who work at two rival publishing companies. Their companies merge. They are both the assistants to the CEOs, share an office, basically spend all day at work despising one another, trying to make each other's lives miserable, such that HR is constantly having to deal with them. But then one day everything changes, and they're no longer playing the hating game, if you know what I mean. It's like a super cheesy romance. I really fell in love with the characters. I was so rooting for the romance. Very good for these rough times, I would say. And I would recommend it if romance is your jam. And even if you're not sure romance is your jam, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. This is cute. You should read it. I liked it, and I have a cold heart of steel, so here you have it. Those are the books that I read in August. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm never going to read this many books again because this was a lot. I cannot keep this up. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you read any of those books and what your thoughts on them were. If you loved them, if you hated them. Like, subscribe, all that jazz. Very, very glad that you tuned in and looking forward to chatting again soon.